Hey, I was kind of sitting around here for a bit, not really doing anything, so I thought I might as well make another one of these. I don't really have a thing to talk about in terms of a book. I have read a book recently. I just finished this book called Stockhausen on Music, which is this collection of is a collection of interviews with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, the critically reviled and acclaimed German composer in the mid 20th century, who did a lot of very fascinating and uh, groundbreaking stuff, not just with the classical music form itself, but with electronic music. He's a very great figure, and he's inspired many other artists and musicians, such as from whatever for just such as Bjork, for example. Bjork's a big fan. Anyway, so but that's not what I want to really talk about. I feel like I want to talk about Isao Takahata, who just passed away yesterday. I don't well, I guess for those who are unfamiliar with him, although if you have clicked this video, you probably do know him. But Isao Takahata is a Japanese animator and film writer and director who, in the latter half of his career, made a lot of films with the great people at Studio Ghibli, with Hayao Miyazaki. Uh, he I just want to kind of just talk about him. He passed away yesterday, and uh, I just want to kind of just share how much I adored his work and how much of a fan I was of him and his films. Admittedly, I haven't actually seen his work pre teaming up with Miyazaki in Studio Ghibli, but I am definitely going to engage with those material over the next few weeks. But I have seen all his films in Studio Ghibli, and there are many things. I guess for those who have seen one or two, you are immediately aware of the main characteristics that differentiate his films from Miyazaki's films. And a very basic or on a very kind of obvious level, there is a distinction in terms of how much how they approach fantasy, or how they approach animation. Miyazaki is more into fantastic, realism or just straight up fantasy, while Isao Takahata's films are more grounded in reality. They're more about smaller stories, about smaller people dealing with day-to-day stuff, while perhaps Miyazaki's film can tend to be more epic or more grand, or take place over a longer period of diegetic time. That's not necessarily the case for all the films, but you get it from the very start when you have Miyazaki, for example. He made Castle in the Sky, and after Castle in the Sky in I think '86, he makes My Neighbor Totoro, who everyone loves Totoro. But this fantastic, realistic kind of story about these kids and this kind of giant and these kids who are away from their sick parent and all that, wanting to visit them, and they get help from this magical beast of sorts. And immediately after that, you have Isao Takahata's first film with Ghibli, which was the dour, probably the most dour and depressing film of their collective discographies or filmographies, with The Grave of the Fireflies, which is about World War II. It was set in World War II, about these two children whose parents who are kind of orphans in this situation, in which they have to figure out ways in which they can sustain themselves as young children in midst of a catastrophic war. It's quite a sad film, but you get that very distinct contrast, and you have these other films. You have movies like My Neighbor, The Yamadas, which feels very much like some kind of realistic comic strippy kind of film about just day-to-day life. You have Only Yesterday, which I think is one of the most underrated films of Studio Ghibli. in general. But what is fascinating for me is my favorite Isao Takahata film is actually the one that is most, which is the most radical departure from his normal realistic style that he kind of maintains throughout his career. Perhaps but my favorite of his films is 1990. I like to say 5 or 3 or something. Let me see. 1994 actually. 1994 is Pompoko, which is this very grand and epic environmentalist fable about these rats who live in this sewer, who live in this you know, who live in the forest, and they're facing this slew of capitalistic deforestation in order to build shopping malls and so forth. And it's like city versus nature, and this whole tension between them, and it's about this whole relationship between humans and animals and everything. And while their films in general are always very there's always a environmental slant to it from the various from Castle in the Sky, we see this stuff from Ponyo, with Miyazaki's films. But for this one in particular, this is actually my favorite Takahata film, because I can't seem to place it necessarily into words that I can most accurately express it off the cuff right now. But it is the film that most touched me in a way that watching it felt like I was in awe of just the creativity of it, just of the scope of it, just of what he was trying to say. Like, perhaps it was, arguably for some people they may feel a little bit too heavy-handed, but I felt that it was such a noble film to make, I think, and it was made in such a fun, creative way, and all the raccoons all have different little powers and specialties, and it's very funny and very entertaining. It's one of my favorite of the films, and one of my favorite, I think, animated films of all time, I think. But that's just my little blurb on Takahata. What I love his films. Of course, there's all the Tales of Princess Kaguya. That was great as well. It was his last film in 2013. But yeah, I've been going on for a bit too long, but I want to explore more of his previous films before he joined Ghibli, and I hope that if you are watching this video or whatever, to some extent, you will check out Pompoko. It's one of my favorite ones, and check out all his other films. He's a great filmmaker, and it's unfortunate that he passed away, but he left this very beautiful and just very strong legacy that I think will influence it has influence and will continue to influence animation indefinitely. So yeah, he's a great filmmaker. Check him out.